You can support me by turning on notifications, subscribing to my channel, and liking the video. Waiting for your comments. The mysterious guest in the empty house. It was late afternoon when I first saw the house silhouetted against the orange-gray sky, perched at the end of a winding gravel road. I remembered it being grander in my childhood, a towering presence with proud turrets and wide porches. Now, a thick layer of dust coated the windows, and the gardens were a mess of tangles and weeds. 10 years had passed since I'd last visited, and time had not been kind. The roof's shingles were patchy, the walls streaked with stains from long ago storms, and the air surrounding it felt stagnant, as though the property itself had taken one long breath and never exhaled. Still, as I stepped out of the car and crunched my way across the unkempt yard, I felt the old tug of family memory. This was the estate where my grandparents had lived until they died, where summer nights smelled of honeysuckle and stories by the fireplace were as thrilling as any carnival ride. But after they passed and the will settled, no one in our family claimed the house. Some found it too large, others too eerie, and eventually it simply stood vacant. Returning now, with permission to assess whether it could be sold or restored, I felt a conflicted swirl of nostalgia and dread. The steps of the porch creaked ominously under my weight. That subtle moan of aged would set my nerves on edge. A battered rocking chair sat there, swaying gently even though the air was utterly still. The moment I entered the foyer, the smell of dust, mildew, and old perfume greeted me. The corridors seemed to stretch beyond logic, thick with shadows that lingered despite the weak glow of the overhead light I managed to switch on. This place had electricity, at least for now, though the sputtering fixture flickered as if uncertain about being revived. My footsteps echoed across the parquet floors. Paintings of distant ancestors lined the walls, stern faces from centuries past whose eyes seemed to follow my every move. I told myself it was a flickering light at play, but an uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. The hush in the air was so profound it felt physical, like walking through a dense fog. I opened the curtains to let in some dusk light, but it only outlined the drift of dust motes swirling in the stale air. That first evening, I planned to do a quick inspection and then head back to town. I had no intention of spending the night in this vacant place with questionable plumbing. Yet, a persistent curiosity drew me deeper into the house. In the living room, antique furniture sat beneath sheets. A grand fireplace, once the heart of family gatherings, now loomed cold and empty, its soot-stained bricks a testament to better times. As I pulled the sheet from an old armchair, a swirl of dust flew up, causing me to cough. Then I heard it, a faint knocking sound, like someone tapping from behind a wall. I froze, heart thumping in my chest. "Hello," I called out, feeling foolish. Perhaps a branch was scraping the siding or an animal scurrying in the walls. But the knock came again, deliberate and measured. I followed the noise through the living room and into the hallway, letting the meager light from my phone guide me. The corridor ended at a locked door that I remembered as leading to the cellar. The doorknob was so cold it stung my palm. I jiggled it, found it locked, and paused. Another knock echoed from the other side, this time more urgent. I searched the key ring given to me by the lawyer who handled my grandparents' estate. The ring held a dozen or so old, tarnished keys. In the gloom, it took me minutes to find the correct one. With an ominous click, the lock gave way. The door creaked open onto a flight of stone steps leading down into darkness. A wave of musty air, heavy with earth and damp, rose to greet me. At the bottom, an old light switch flickered, feebly illuminating the cellar. Shelves lined the walls, cluttered with dusty jars, rusted tools, and old suitcases. But there was no sign of anything that could have made the knocking. My footsteps echoed as I gingerly explored, half expecting a cat or raccoon. The corners of the cellar sank into shadow, beyond the weak light's reach. A few scattered footprints marred the dust on the floor, my own, presumably. Just as I turned to leave, a shape flickered at the edge of vision. I spun around. Nothing. Telling myself it was a trick of my over-anxious mind, I left in haste, climbing the stairs back to the hallway. Once upstairs, I locked the cellar door with a decisive click. Another knock from behind it made me jump so violently I nearly dropped the keys. This time, the knock felt closer, more impatient. A chill wormed through my entire body. Something was definitely behind that door. But what? It's an old house, I mumbled. Pipes, maybe. My voice sounded hollow in the silence. Outside, the sun had set, leaving behind a dull purple sky. The idea of driving back to town at this hour felt reassuring, but a persistent curiosity or sense of duty told me I should check the second floor for structural issues. If I left now, I'd have to return another day, dragging out this unsettling process. Besides, a part of me wanted to prove I wasn't spooked by a few odd knocks. Summoning courage, I climbed the grand staircase. Upstairs, the corridor was lined with bedrooms where I had once slept as a child. The air felt cooler here, as though each closed door guarded stale air from decades gone by. With each slow step, floorboards groaned in protest. I opened the first bedroom door. Moonlight streamed through a large window, illuminating a swirl of dust. The bed frame, stripped of linens, looked lonely. I flicked on the overhead light, revealing old wallpaper peeling at the corners. Then I heard a subtle rustling behind me. Turning swiftly, I saw nothing. Only the corridor, quiet and seemingly infinite. I moved on to the next room, then the next, finding them all similarly empty. My anxiety began to subside, replaced by a sense of anticlimax. Perhaps the house was just old, the knocks were random, and I'd conjured illusions from my childhood fears. Then, as I approached the final room at the hall's end, my grandparents' old master bedroom, I spotted a glow beneath the door. Light was shining from inside, even though the entire floor should be dark. My pulse quickened. With trembling fingers, I pushed the door open. The lamp on the bedside table was lit, casting a warm glow on the dusty furniture. And there, standing by the window, was a figure, a man with his back turned to me. My voice caught in my throat, a mix of shock and alarm. The man was tall, draped in a dark coat, head slightly bowed as if in contemplation. "Excuse me," I managed, stepping forward. "Who are you? Why are you in this house?" He didn't turn, but he seemed to stiffen at my presence. A moment passed in tense silence. Then, in a voice both soft and resonant, he said, "I didn't mean to intrude. I thought this place was unoccupied." I was startled by the calmness of his response. My fear tangled with confusion. "It is unoccupied," I replied, "but I'm the caretaker for now. How did you get in?" He exhaled quietly. "There was a door open, or maybe it was unlocked." "That's impossible," I said, though my memory of the house's various entrances was hazy at best. "The front door, sure, but I'd locked it behind me." Then I remembered the old kitchen entrance, rarely used, which might not have latched properly. As I spoke, the man remained by the window, face shadowed. All I could see was a reflection of the lamp's light glinting off the glass. The silence stretched. "Could you turn around?" I asked, my voice shaky. "I'd like to see who I'm speaking with." He turned slowly. My breath caught. His face was pale, and there was something oddly timeless about his features, like a black and white photograph come to life. He wore a faint half-smile, though his eyes looked weighed down by sadness or weariness. Yet there was nothing overtly threatening about him. "I apologize for startling you," he said politely. "I found my way here while traveling through the countryside. Saw the lights. Thought maybe I could rest for a moment. This house has a certain pull." A wave of goosebumps prickled my arms. Lights? The electricity was on, but I hadn't turned on the upstairs lamps. "You turned on the lamp?" I asked, glancing at the old brass fixture on the nightstand. He nodded lightly. The darkness was oppressive. My mind raced. The house had an unnerving vibe already, but the presence of a stranger, one who snuck in quietly, felt too surreal. Yet his manner was polite, almost gentlemanly. I stammered, "You can't just wander into someone's property. This estate belongs to my family." "I meant no harm," he assured me. "I thought perhaps it was long abandoned. For decades, I've heard rumors of a place called Riverson House, where those who enter find echoes of the past." I frowned. Riverson House was indeed the old name for this estate, but it was rarely used outside official documents. "How did you—" I began, but he cut me off with a slight gesture of his hand. "Forgive me. I'll leave if you wish. But might I sit for a moment? This house reminds me of something." He let the words trail off, as though uncertain how to finish the thought. Despite my misgivings, a strange empathy welled up in me. Something about him radiated loneliness, a quiet yearning. "Fine." I relented. "But just for a bit. Then you have to go. No offense, but I'm not comfortable with uninvited guests at this hour." He nodded in understanding. "Thank you." We stepped to the master bedroom sitting area, a couple of armchairs and a small side table. It was surreal, hosting a stranger in a house that should have been desolate, with the moonlight illuminating floating dust specks. I noticed how the man's coat, though old-fashioned, looked pristine, untouched by the dust that clung to everything else. "May I ask your name?" I ventured. He paused. "Call me Henry," he said eventually, voice subdued. "Yours?" I gave him my name. Then an awkward silence settled. My mind buzzed with questions. Who was Henry? Why was he here? And how had he known the old name of the house? But I didn't know how to ask without sounding accusatory. We made small talk, if it could be called that. He asked about my connection to the estate, his tone gentle, as if genuinely curious. I explained how my grandparents died, leaving me partial responsibilities. Henry listened intently, an occasional flicker of sadness crossing his face when I mentioned they'd passed away a decade prior. During a lull, a subtle scraping sound echoed from downstairs. My heart lurched. Henry cocked his head, as if hearing it too. "Your caretaker friend?" he asked softly. I frowned. "I came alone." The scraping sounded again, followed by a muffled thump, like furniture being dragged. Fear lanced through me. I rose to my feet, phone in hand. "Stay here," I told Henry, although my voice shook. He didn't protest, just inclined his head calmly. Descending the stairs felt like stepping into a dream. The light in the foyer still flickered uncertainly. Shadows seemed to shift as I passed. As I neared the living room, the scraping grew louder. Then I froze. In the living room, the old rocking chair was moving on its own, scraping across the floor. It rocked in slow, deliberate arcs, though there was no breeze. I stared in disbelief. Summoning courage, I edged closer. The chair abruptly stopped, as if scolded. My pulse hammered in my ears. I scanned the room for an intruder, but saw nothing. Then footsteps overhead. Someone was pacing the second-floor hallway. Yet Henry was in the master bedroom. Unless he decided to wander, that meant a third presence roamed the house. I spun around and dashed back upstairs, fear overtaking caution. Reaching the corridor, I found it empty. The footprints I'd left in the dust were there, but now additional footprints overlapped them, leading to the locked cellar door. But that door was on the ground floor. My confusion mounted. Rechecking my memory, I realized the corridor ended near the master bedroom, with no cellar entrance. So what door were these footprints heading to? Following them brought me to a door I could have sworn didn't exist earlier. Painted black, with an ornate brass knob. My hand trembled as I grasped the knob. It turned easily, revealing a small room I'd never seen before, bare walls, a single window, and a battered desk. Candlelight flickered inside. Startled, I stepped in. The space was musty, as though sealed for decades. A single lit candle sat on the desk, flame dancing without a breeze. The rest of the room stood empty. Then, from the corner behind the door, a whisper, "Leave us alone." I whirled. No one was there. My heart pounded so hard I thought I'd faint. Another whisper, "This is our home." Panicked, I backed out of the room, slamming the door shut. My breathing came in gulps. The footprints in the dust vanished. Shaking from head to toe, I stumbled back to the master bedroom. "Henry," I called, voice unsteady. He still sat in the armchair, the lamp casting shadows over his face. At my approach, he lifted his gaze, concern in his eyes. "You look pale. Did something happen?" I burst out. "There's something... someone else in this house. I heard them. There's a room that wasn't there before." He nodded sympathetically. "I know. This house has corners where the past lingers. Perhaps you saw a glimpse of what used to be." My mind reeled. "You talk as if you understand." Henry sighed. "I, too, have known this place for a long time. Before you arrived, I thought I was alone. But the house, it reveals itself in strange ways. Sometimes the walls shift. Doors appear. The house breathes memories." "How do you know all this?" I demanded, voice edging on hysteria. He looked at me with sorrow. "Because I've walked these halls more times than I can recall. Once, decades ago, I was a guest here, but my visit took a tragic turn. There was an accident, a fall down the old cellar steps. I was never found in time. A cold dread spread through me. That's not possible." He stood, coat rustling. I waited, thinking my host would come, but they left the house soon after. So I remained. Over time, I realized I was tethered here, unseen, unheard, just a spirit in an empty house. I shook my head in disbelief. "You can't be." "Dead." He offered a thin, sad smile. "I suspect so. Yet sometimes the house allows me glimpses of the living. I see them wandering, but they seldom see me. I only can appear when the boundary between now and memory is thin. Tonight you arrived, stirring old echoes. My rational mind rebelled, but everything about him, his archaic clothing, the strange warmth in his eyes, the unearthly calm, made sense in a horrifying way. The knocks in the cellar, the footstep illusions, the non-existent door. He was part of the house's hidden memory, or the house was part of his perpetual haunting. Terror warred with pity in my chest. "So, are there others here?" He nodded. "Some remain. Their presence is fainter, though. The house holds them. This place is a labyrinth of old regrets, tragedies, and haunted corners." I tried to warn you, but perhaps you can still leave. My heart hammered. The idea of leaving this cursed place right now was overwhelming, but I was desperate. Yes, I want to go. I managed. But will you be stuck forever? Henry lowered his head. I suspect so. Unless the house is destroyed or redeemed, maybe your arrival can grant closure. The living have the power to break spells. But if you fail, you risk being trapped too. I swallowed hard. Part of me longed to flee. Another part felt an unexpected compassion. How do I help? He gestured toward the hallway. In the cellar, there's an old trunk. Inside, you'll find my letters. If you read them, you may understand. Burn them, along with the trunk, and maybe our ties to this realm can be severed. The thought of going back down to the cellar sent chills through me, but Henry's pleading gaze pushed me on. Without further words, I mustered courage and grabbed a lantern from the closet. Heading downstairs, I found the cellar door once more. The knob was warmer this time, as if the house were waking. The steps groaned beneath me, each one carrying me deeper into the gloom. In the cellar's far corner lay an ancient wooden trunk, half buried under debris. With effort, I dragged it out into the open. My lantern light revealed rusted hinges. I forced it open, discovering a stack of letters, each in old-fashioned cursive, addressed to a certain Margaret. A swift skim read of the top letter revealed Henry's heartbreak. He had visited the estate, seeking Margaret's hand in marriage, but an argument occurred. He tumbled down the steps. The final letter, scribbled in desperation, seemed never sent. My hands trembled. This was the soul of his sorrow, pinned under decades of dust. Following his instruction, I carried the trunk outside, ignoring every hair-raising creak behind me. The night air was cold against my face. I fetched logs from a neglected woodpile and built a small bonfire by the overgrown garden. As the flame rose, I hurled the trunk and letters onto the blaze. The fire roared, sparks dancing into the night sky. Somewhere in the flickering glow, I sensed a shift. The oppressive weight that had clung to the estate lifted slightly, as if an ancient lung finally exhaled. The trunk crackled, pages curling in the flames. A whisper drifted across the yard, Henry's voice. "Thank you." At that moment, a swirl of ashes rose from the fire, catching the moonlight. A sense of calm overtook me. The house behind me seemed less foreboding, as if part of the darkness had peeled away. Then, with one final rush of wind, the fire died down, leaving only embers. Exhausted, I returned indoors. The living room felt somehow brighter, the rocking chair still. No phantom footsteps echoed in the corridors. Everything was silent, but not oppressively so, more like the hush after a storm. I tiptoed up to the master bedroom, half expecting to see Henry, but found it empty. The lamp had vanished, replaced by an old, cold candlestick. A faint sense of peace permeated the air. In the morning, sunlight streamed through the windows, bright and warm, revealing the peeling wallpaper and dusty furniture in a kinder light. The entire estate felt different, as if a new chapter had begun. I walked the halls with renewed confidence. No knocking, no door illusions. The house was just a quiet, old building, free from its ghosts, or so I hoped. I packed up my things, stepping out onto the porch for the last time. Before leaving, I paused. Something fluttered in the breeze near the porch rail, a scrap of paper. I picked it up. It was charred at the edges, a fragment of a letter with faint words scrawled. "Forgive me. I never meant to cause you pain." A gentle breeze carried the fragment away. My chest tightened with bittersweet emotion. Henry's final apology, perhaps, or the last echo of a haunting that had now found rest. I closed the door behind me, locking it with the old key. The estate might remain standing, or it might be sold or demolished, but I felt certain its restless spirits had finally found a release. Gazing up at the windows one last time, I could almost imagine Henry standing there, smiling faintly in farewell. Then I walked back to my car, heart pounding with awe and relief, grateful that I, too, had escaped the house's shadow, and that the mysterious guest had at last found peace in its empty rooms.